Good morning, friends and family. Crushing Iron Podcast.
Welcome. It is a gloomy day, but hey, at least we're getting rain. It is August 3rd, the year 2023. Welcome aboard, everybody. You're listening to the Crushing Iron Podcast, episode 704.
Yeah. And every day, it's been just like Saturday here in Wisconsin.
Oh, has it?
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yes. Thanks for rubbing that in. I appreciate that.
A few fluffy clouds, cumulonimbus, beautiful blue sky, no smoke. It's just calm blue water. And
well, thanks for rubbing it in. It was the other night when I played tennis. It feels like 108. So I appreciate that. I appreciate you letting me know that somewhere, and it must be there. It must be like that way in other parts of the country. Because I had two people yesterday morning. They wrote out words that I haven't heard or read in months, and it was quite cool out this morning. Had a great run, and I'm like, you know what? If there was I think there was a middle finger emoji, but I really wanted to click on that because I'm like, just rub it in. Rub it in. Like here in Kansas, you wake up and it looks like you're like, maybe it rained last night, and it didn't. But the windows are covered in dew and humidity because it's just so nasty. But we might get a little bit of respite next week, but whatever. I'll make sure to dig that in, when you guys are still freezing and we're in like the 60s. So
yeah, right.
We all have our turn. Yeah, we all have our turn. There's always positives and negatives, just like everything else in life. But we're excited to be here today. Hope you're all having a great week and a good start to your August. If it's your first time tuning in today, welcome. We appreciate you giving us your time. You have quite a lot of options in the triathlon podcast universe and just podcasts in general terms are pretty valuable. So we appreciate you tuning in today. We cover it all. We do swim, bike, and run specific podcasts. We do race recaps and also a lot of race previews. But for the most part, Mike and I, as coaches, athletes, best friends, we just sit back, relax, have an open, honest discussion about what we're going through in life, not just as human beings, but also as coaches and athletes ourselves. We also talk frequently about what our own athletes are going through. Mike and I work with a wide range of athletes all across the globe, from beginner level triathletes looking at the very first 5K or sprint triathlon, all the way up through elite level amateurs trying to get back to world championships, and everyone in between just all over the world. And we use the feedback loop we have with them and training peaks, emails, text messages, and the like to drive the discussion today. We also frequently use our Facebook group. You can search that, Crushing Iron Group. Answer one simple question. We'll let you right in. Awesome people, fantastic community, solid resource in a oftentimes overcomplicated sport with a lot of misinformation. Is a great space to get good, actionable feedback from athletes who have been around the block, who have done it all, seen it all, and for most of us, made the mistakes that you're trying to avoid. And a lot of people in there were more than happy to give you their feedback so you can hopefully avoid some of the same pitfalls we've all had. But that's it. No sponsors, no ads, one agenda. And that's to keep you happy and healthy in your endurance sports journey.
yeah, and how's that going for you, buddy? Good? You seem happy and healthy this weekend.
I am happy and I am quite healthy. But I had that part's good. Racing season is always, as I was asked so frequently at camp, which always makes me think, do I look unfit and unhealthy? Because, do you race anymore? Do you run? I'm like, listen, I do. I train. I occasionally will weave in a race. But when you're in a position like mine, it's hard to separate work and training and life. So yeah, I always kind of battle the work-life boundaries and kind of crossover that is coaching a sport you also love to participate in, then also that is your full-time job. So yeah, it's a lot, but I'm generally happy and healthy 100%.
I mean, I don't think you can underscore that enough because it's tough, man. I'm trying, like we're talking about it today, the final block and of training, and I'm going into Wisconsin and coaching a lot of people, and it becomes part of your DNA constantly, and I just how many times have you actually seen somebody say, "Oh, the weather's beautiful today," and it's like it was a great run. It's like right now, it's all I see is, "Wow, it was hot," and I don't know. That's one of the things that we can get into the block stuff, but I've always been that guy that just kind of goes out and does the heat. I know we talk about saving yourself or whatever, but for some reason, I'm just called to it, and I somehow beat myself up with it. But I think it pays off some. I don't know. It's one of those things that I've always tried to master. How do you stay cool even though it's ridiculous? It's kind of hard, but I think it can be done sort of.
It can most certainly be done, and we're going to go over that today as we talk through final preparations for Ironman Wisconsin or Wisconsin 70.3. We talked about our camp there. I mentioned this on Tuesday. We would do kind of a race overview and breakdown, but we've done that. We've done it plenty of times. You can go back in the archives. Maybe Mike, if you could drop that in a couple of those episode numbers in the show notes. Those of you who haven't listened to them or just need a little bit of refresher. But before I get into that, make sure you watch. I know a lot of you are going to, Wisconsin's got a lot going on right now. They got the USAT Nationals that are in Milwaukee this weekend, which is going to be like 5,000 people, it sounds like. A lot of people going in town. They got the PTO US Open, which would be Friday and Saturday at a really awkward time of day. Like I think 4 p.m. is it's the start time. You got the men on Friday, you got the women on Saturday. This looks like to be Jan Frodeno's second to last race. Making Ironman World Championships in the East will be his final race. Pretty good field, not stacked because as most PTO fields do, is they put the start lists out, like 6 months in advance, and you look at the top 20, you're like, this might be the best, deepest race of all time. And then as most races go, about 3 days before the race, that field of top 20 dwindles down to about 6, and they all have done that. Same on the women's side. A lot of the better athletes have dropped out, but it still looks to be a pretty solid race. And I think you're going to see, and this is something that I'll mention today when we talk about Wisconsin, but it wasn't that long ago. I don't want to say 6-7 years ago where, the general consensus, and this is not just against amateurs, but also in the professional field, was you can't win it on the swim, but you can sure as hell lose it. And because the swim is so short comparatively speaking to the rest of them, and a lot of people won't put as much effort into it. Well, the professional field now is so deep and so fast and can swim so well that you're going to see, I think, a great example on Friday specifically and on Saturday, that the top level swimmers, if they can get away and unpack together, it changes the whole game. Changes the whole day. And while it might not technically win them the race, it really puts them in the best position to win the race, because they're going to have to run extra faster than the rest. And if you think about how much harder it is to gain 3 or 4 minutes on the run versus being out ahead and coming out of the water a minute out of the swim, and then being with a good group getting on the bike, it's a big deal. So look out for that, especially on Friday with the men's field. You're going to see a lot of the pros, the pro men, absolutely drill the swim. Jan Frodeno, Ben Canute, Aaron Royale. They will absolutely lay the hammer down, and you'll look for guys like Magnus Detlev and Blumenfeld. I mean, if they can get on to that first group, then you're probably looking at both of those guys going head toe to toe for the win. But if they don't make that group, they're going to have to see how hard it is and how many matches they're going to have to burn to get to that group. So it really is. This is going to be a really interesting race, and always a good, I think, educator for athletes to clue in and watch these pros and listen to some, I don't know who's announcing it, but halfway decent to abysmal announcing to at least learn a few things. So tune to that, and then good luck to everyone racing this weekend. But yeah, as we were talking before the show, and last week, we've done these race recaps before, but this morning I spent about 30-45 minutes going back, and obviously we're going to talk about Wisconsin today. If you're not racing Wisconsin, don't tune out, tune in, and this can easily be used for races that are very similar. Hilly races where it's an open, a big open water swim in a lake, like, not so much a river, not a flat rolling, but there are a lot of courses that are very similar to Wisconsin. And what I did is I went back and I looked at some of the top 5 to 10 performances of athletes that I've worked with over the last 7 or 8 years, including my own. And when I mean performances, I don't mean the fastest times. I meant the athletes who have done exceptionally well, have improved significantly from the previous time they did it. So not only have set huge PRs, but have also been resilient like they were last year and made it through the day. And then we've also had plenty of athletes that have, again, PR'd there, but also been on the podium multiple times. So we have a lot of experience. And so what I did is, again, I went back and looked at the training leading up to it, how they were able to execute things, the focus. And then the biggest thing is how they were able to kind of transfer their focus and fitness to utilize that to perform their best on race day, because it is a course where you have to be very, very calculated and on point all day long. And that's something that I want to go through and hopefully set you guys up for success today.
That would be great if you could do that for everybody. I think don't forget about the CrossFit games that are going on in Madison this weekend either. And honestly, I said that as a joke, but nobody was laughing. And I think, though, that it's kind of a good reminder that you really want to be as strong as possible when you're out there racing, especially at Wisconsin. It's a course where, specifically, I've been focusing on that for the last few weeks and will continue to do it. I know you're going to probably talk about big gear work and things like that, but for me, it's all about, a few weeks ago you mentioned I'd like to see somebody do big gear work all the way into a race and see how that goes. And I think I might be one of your test subjects because I've been really focusing on that. And really also, I don't know if it's because I played a lot of sort of shorter, more explosive sports, but I always feel good like getting out of the saddle and just hammering for a while. I feel like that's always sort of in me a little bit. And so I've really been kind of concentrating on that high upper zone 2, really working that part of me, because I'm just not an endurance sport background guy, but it's sort of like that pacing. Am I taking that zone 2 seriously enough? And so I've been working that. But since you didn't want to talk about CrossFit games, why don't you go ahead and talk about what you learned by looking at some of these athletes?
CrossFit games. Yeah, it's their last year in Madison. But no,
it is.
So yeah, it is. Yeah, they announced that the last day of camp. But no, going back and looking at, we'll start with the swim. Madison does something which they used to be, sadly, a mass start, and I wish they would go back, but they won't. But one of the unique things you find about this race, one, is how difficult the second loop is. And so, again, how, the way that I've trained athletes this year is also a lot different than the way I've trained athletes in the past, because while the swim isn't quote unquote everything, it does make a giant impact on your day. And not just from a fitness standpoint, but I've also come to realize as a coach, having been there in person, having been at races, when you see an athlete come out of the water with either 1, disgust, or 2, elation, you immediately have a bad or good feeling about how the bike's going to go. And because everyone, whether they admit it or not, comes out of any race, out of any swim, regardless of distance, with a, whew, man, I'm way ahead of schedule, or I'm behind schedule, or I'm super pumped, or I'm disappointed. I've seen it on your face before. I've seen both at Wisconsin. I've seen, man, that went well, or woof. Or I've also seen, ugh, that maybe didn't go as well. And one of the things they've changed now, obviously they used to be with the mass start, it was a counterclockwise 1 loop, but now what they've done is it's a clockwise loop and it's a 2-looper. While that might not, seem like a huge significant change, it is. You have clean water for the most part on the first loop. And then the second loop it's kind of like you're a Ferrari, especially if you're passing me. It's kind of like you're a Ferrari moving in and out of buses in neutral. And one of the biggest things you can have right now is, one, obviously you always want to have a tremendous amount of muscular endurance. 25s and 50s are great, but you really want to have a huge amount of muscular endurance, lots of pull buoy sessions. One, you want to save your legs. Two, you want to get really, really strong in upper body, because that's the energy you want to have extra, right? So when you think about, and I'm going to talk about why the second loop and training for that is also important, is when you want to increase speed, increase strength, and increase force in the water, you want to do it from the torso up. You don't want to do it from your legs. One, the obvious, right? You're going to be hopefully you're going to be saving that for the rest of the day. You and I watched, again, going back to the World Aquatic Championships, we watched the 800 and 1500, and it's surprising how fast they go and how little of the legs they use. And they don't have to do anything afterwards. But those leg muscles, not only do you have to use them for a 112 bike, but a 26.2 mile run, they also take up an enormous amount of oxygen. So when you're swimming, you want to be able to increase speed, increase turnover, and be strong enough to use that upper body as your primary source of propulsion forward, not your big legs. Because also most athletes, I would say 60 to 70% of the athletes in the field, I don't want to say struggle with their breathing, but probably don't breathe as well as they could or should in open water. And what that also does is the fact that those huge muscle groups take up so much blood and oxygen also raises your heart rate and raises your respiratory rate. So you're breathing even harder, right? Which causes you to probably slow down because you think you're going too fast. But the thing is you're not going faster. You're breathing faster. So that's one of the things you have to do, is to have a really, really strong muscular endurance for these swims. That means, again, a lot of upper body work, not focusing much on kicking. But the biggest thing, you'll see us on the second loop of the swim, is having different speeds. Right. And going back to what you want to focus on on the first loop, the second loop, you're going to be, regardless. I mean, if you at least start in the first 80% of the field, you're going to be passing people in the second loop, especially if you start in the first 300 to 400 people. You're going to come all the way around the first loop with fairly clean water. The second loop is going to start. Sighting is going to be a little bit more of a challenge. But the biggest thing is how you're going to navigate the 1,500 people now in the water in front of you, going a little bit slower, more than likely not holding a very straight line, being a little bit more erratic, breaststroke kicks, people on the back. It really is it's like swimming two different races. So what you have to do is, one, be very, very specific on holding your line, swimming as close to the buoys as you can, but also, and again, this is a huge struggle with athletes, and sometimes they'll joke about it, and you say, all right, I want you to swim this 100 in zone 2 and this one in zone 4, and they'll say, I only have one zone, and it's not drown. And so what happens is if you don't have extra gears, even in an Ironman swim, getting around someone, if for example, you're swimming up behind someone in the second loop and they're covering up the buoy side, the inside of the buoy, you don't have the extra gear to maybe shoot a gap and swim in between them to shoot your line. You now have to go over and around them to get around. Right? Because one, you don't have the extra gear to get in between, but what you also are doing now is creating more distance. You're having to swim more distance to get around them, or you choose to get stuck behind them. And that might sound like drafting, but it's not, because they're not going fast enough. What they're actually doing is slowing you down. So you have to have extra gears, which means you have to have a quick arm turnover, right? So first loop, you really want to be able to have long, strong turnover. It's very similar if you, in the past, you've listened to some of our Ironman Louisville podcasts, where part of the swim was upstream, the next part was downstream. It's very similar as well as like they used to do Chattanooga 7.3 back when the majority of the swimmers could actually make the distance on their own. They would do upstream, across, and downstream. Now that's too difficult, so we swim the whole thing downstream. But what we would say is, anytime upstream, you want to have a higher turnover, because you have to get through the water. If you're not going to go anywhere, which is, again, why they changed it to just a downstream swim. Well, on this course, the first loop, the biggest focus, again, like I said, muscular endurance, you're long and strong, right? Getting the most amount of water as you can. But what you then have to do in the second loop to create that extra speed to get through and around people is have extra arm turnover. And that is a huge deficit for most swimmers in triathlon, is they, one, don't have that extra gear. They, two, don't know what it's like to have a fast turnover. They do long and slow and careful and smooth, and they wonder why their open water times are so much slower. And again, more people, more wash, more current. Usually, I've seen this in the last 2 or 3 years. The second loop is significantly slower than the first, and it always gets choppier, right? And so again, you have to have that gear, you have to have the speed. You can't just have it on race day. Use something you have to practice, right? But still doing 25s, 50s, 100s, really, really high effort. Because if you're not used to it and you try to do it, then again, going back to the same thing like I said before, not having an extra gear, more arm speed, even if you're not using your legs, more arm speed, if your body isn't used to it, you haven't trained that level of fitness, is going to raise your heart rate. And again, and you're going to slow down right back to where you were, not because you're going too fast, but because you don't have the fitness to hold what you need to hold. And that is, again, the big difference in the first and second loop, not just from a contact point. Yes, it's the same distance, but the amount of obstacles, people, and, individuals you're going to have to move in and around to, again, take the shortest route possible. I mean, just quickly, if you swim an extra 200 yards, and that might seem like a lot, right? It might not seem, if I can only swim an extra 200 yards, that's really not that bad. But let's say you're a 2-minute 20 swimmer. That's 4 minutes and 40 seconds. Do you know how long that is? I know it might not seem like a long period of time. That's about the average time, I would say, for a Wisconsin transition. Maybe it'll be in the low end. That's basically you taking an extra 4:40, right, in transitional, doubling that to 8, and just sitting there, right, like a standstill penalty. Or if you swim straight and you don't take those extra 200 yards, it's like you immediately exiting the swim and now you're transported on your bike at mile 1. Would you take that? Yes, I would take that, right? Again, it doesn't seem, or that's about a half mile on the run. These don't seem insignificant. A lot of people overlook things like this, but when you start to add these, right, on the whole course of the day, you're adding extra time in your swim, right? Because 200 yards for most people, they swim way more than that. They swim a lot, especially in the second loop with so many people there. They swim 200 or 300 yards extra. They dilly-dally in transition 1. They dilly-dally in transition 2. You're looking at an extra 10 or 15 minutes. That's a mile and a half on the run of time. Again, doesn't seem that much out of the gate. Doesn't seem like that much in the swim. But when you hit mile 20 of the run, and you're thinking to yourself, man, I'm almost making that cutoff. I'm almost making that cutoff. You won't have the energy because the day has been so long. You won't have the energy to get it back. You're just holding, and you're going to wish earlier in the race and earlier in your training, you just started to focus on the things that you could have to not have to fight for those 15 minutes, but to almost get them for free.
Very good stuff there, man. I as a sort of an average to maybe a little bit above average swimmer consistently, I mean, I have my moments or whatever, but when I get in this water, I have 2 top end goals. One is to swim straight, like you said, and 2 is to not stop, because you summarized it perfectly, but my thing is, like, I don't try to get fancy in there, because one of the things that can happen with swimming is, like, if you get out of your comfort zone, then you end up having to stop, or you kind of go off course a little bit or whatever. I just try to stay buoy to buoy. And, it's sort of like run aid station to aid station, because the minute, you know how it goes, man. It's the minute your mind starts drifting on the bike, you're going to hit a pothole or something stupid like that. It's just karma. It's just Murphy's Law, whatever you want to call it. And the same goes with the swim. If you're kind of like, all right, man, I'm feeling this good. Now I'm going to start thinking about work or how I'm going to start this ride out or whatever. That's when somebody's going to clap you in the face or something. But it's like, it's just a weird phenomenon. So it's, for me, I always try to start out as slow as possible, because I know that I'm amped. I get in that water. I use that first 300-400 yards as a warm up, but I just try to stay slow and really let my body come around and get used to the water and everything like that, and just go buoy to buoy to buoy. And I'm not going to be super fast, but like you just said, I could be super slow if I'm stopping a lot, if I'm not swimming straight. I think we looked at this. I mean, a lot of people will end up swimming like 300 or 400 extra yards on an Ironman swim because of their either sighting or just whatever, wanting to be away, especially with the Wisconsin swim, how it used to be. You could really drift out into the middle of Lake Monona and not realize where the hell you were. But I think with the tighter course and the buoys, it just seems a lot more manageable in a way. But as you come around that second loop, and I don't even, I try to work on what you're saying, that, the ability to kind of burst and get around and kind of get into so you'll do that, a bunch of times during the race. But I don't ever, I mean, like for me as like I said, a somewhat average swimmer, I really wait till about 500 because when you're coming down that backside and there's a lot of traffic on the last loop, I'll start to drift just a hair out because then it just clears out because you're coming in and you're not turning again. So that's when you can kind of get into that. And usually, hopefully the goal is that you'll have sort of the strength and the stamina to finish strong right there, and kind of get out in a little more clean water and just kind of go in hard. But I do have to say too that I've had very difficult beat me up swims up there in the past. And when that face I gave you when I come out of there, like, holy shit, that just killed me. Those have usually been my fastest bikes because now I'm like, okay, I got to make up some time. It's like this kind of double-edged thing because, and when I get out like last year, I'm like, that was good. I got some time in the bank. I kind of start, although last year was kind of unique. But I do think that there's something to be said for cruising that swim, but also having it, be locked in. You know what I mean? It's like I was talking about with that zone 2 thing earlier. It's like, you don't really want it zone 1. You want it to be up in zone 2 and have it be forceful enough to kind of get you rolling and kind of get you in. I mean, to me, it sets the tone for the competitive nature of the rest of the race too. Mm-hmm. Because if you're just out there sort of lollygagging around and floating and, you get in and you're comfortable with your time, I don't know if that really kind of wakes you up into the race yet. And then you got to spend the next 40 minutes on the bike kind of getting your head straight. But I think if you get on the bike and you're feeling good out of the water, but you're also jacked up a little bit, that's a good thing.
There's nothing like feeling jacked up either from I'm a little bit discouraged or frustrated to I had a great swim. It really is a great place to be. And as a final few things as we lead into the bike and how you're training right now, what might set you up for success is, one of the big, I guess maybe a good analogy is we've all been on the interstate on a road trip. We're making really, 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 really great time. And maybe you're using the Waze app and you're cruising along on, going 80, or if you're going like 55 and you feel like you're flying and all of a sudden Waze pops up and it says, traffic up ahead, 38-minute delay. And you're like, oh my God, I was making such good time. I'm feeling so good. You immediately get frustrated. Then you pull up and all of a sudden you're at a dead stop. You see it in the distance and you immediately feel frustrated. That's what the second loop feels like. That's how many people are there. So you can either be, you can either swim and prepare to be like the 18-wheelers who has to, be stuck. And then, when people want to go around you, kind of like veer to the left and veer to like, no one's getting in front of me. Or it can be like the crotch rocket where they just kind of, weave their way in and out, make their way up. It's kind of like cheating, but still you get the gist, and that's what you want it to feel like. No big deal. I'm taking my lines. We went through this at the camp last weekend, some specifics, and I'm not going to talk about them today. But on how to take the lines, how to approach things so you don't swim a long period of time. So if you're in that, again, if you're coaching yourself, a lot of things that we're doing right now is I had a lot of athletes swimming. We swim a lot year round, but then closer to a race like this, because of how important the bike portion is on this race, I'll have a lot of athletes go down from 3 swims to 2. One of them is really, really, really long. Like I had a lot of athletes doing 45 to 5K swims earlier this week. And then later this week, it'll be, 100s to 200s, but it'll be fast. So we're still keeping the speed, right, to benefit that second loop, but we're making sure we get this because, 3 to 4, 5 weeks out of the race, you're not going to be dropping your time by 10 minutes, right, on the swim. You're just not. But what you want to do is make sure you are increasing your ability to maintain that muscular endurance and that form for a long period. Because, again, in Ironman swimming, and Ironman in general, it's not how fast you go, it's how little you slow down. So you can hold form for a long period of time and keep that speed. You're going to have a great swim, especially in Wisconsin. But the main reason for dropping down to 2 swims is to add an extra bike. Because this course, to me, your ability to perform well on race day is not just about how you train the bike, but how you execute the bike. And I've seen, I've taken on athletes before who have been self-coached or who have, working out of a book or have worked with another coach, and some of the first things I say to them, kind of going back and looking at their races and their history, is you don't have any business running that slow. And so your first thought is, all right, well, let's up the run volume. Maybe you do some more longer runs. And I'm like, no, you didn't bike enough. Because again, when you think about covering the distance, so much effort goes into doing in these really, really, really long runs, these single day century rides or 120-mile rides. But when you look at the rest of the week, you didn't ride that much. You just didn't. And then the amount of time it takes you to recover from these super long runs, these super long rides, you don't get anything else done. So you're just practicing being the same speed. In order to do well in this course, you have to do two things. One, or more than two things, a lot of things. You have to know how to handle your bike. So not being an not being an erg mode where your things are shifting, not knowing how to shift a lot of athletes are going to lose 5 to 10 minutes in this course minimum by not knowing how to corner, not knowing how to descend, and then also not knowing how to shift. They're going to drop chains. And guess whose fault is it when you drop a chain? It's yours. It's not the course's fault.
The mechanic.
Yeah, it's not the mechanic's fault. The bike shop you took your bike to, probably Tuesday of race week, and said, "Hey, I'm going out of town. Can you get to somebody tomorrow?" And they're like, "Sure." It's yours for not shifting correctly. So you got to know how to shift. You got to know how to take corners. You got to know how to maintain speed. But your ability to execute the best day period is how even you can ride. That is something that I drove home this last week with our athletes again. This is something I've really tried to instill in the athletes that we have racing is you want this on the punchier the course, the smoother and more controlled you need to be. And what I mean by that is, for those of you, that work with power, is you want your average power or normalized power to be as close as possible. Period. You want and the difference between your AP and your MP. So again, your average power and normalized power is called your variability index, or the VI you might see in Training Peaks. The perfect score, right? The average, normalized, or equal. Let's say that just 200, 1.0. The further apart your average power goes to your normalized power, the higher your variability index goes. A variability index over 1.08, for most people who don't have a lot of access to punchy roads and don't have a lot of experience, even anything under 1.10 for this course is going to set you up for the best run. And the reason for that is this course is so punchy with so many hills that are so short, and not only just so short, but coming in and out of turns. I think a lot of athletes underestimate the whole deal here is about the hills, but you coast into turns and you explode out of turns. Those are also surges that don't have elevation to blame, right? So again, when I talked about before, the first thing is going in and out of turns. So practicing cornering, being on hills, and terrain that make you practice holding speed, but then also being smooth. So going up the hill, dropping your gear down to where it's a little bit easier, not necessarily spinning out. So it's the easy thing. You're bouncing around in your saddle going 120 RPMs, but also to where you're not, leaning left and leaning right, grinding out at a 45 cadence, producing a giant amount of power. And then on the downhill, not pedaling at all. Right. So you got these huge surges. So that's going to really, really make the difference in your AP and MP significant. And the reason why that's so important is your speed comes from your average power. So again, going back to the 200, the perfect score, the 1.0 that you might see on like a very, very smooth, easy, ride on the trainer, your speed comes from that. Anything from the MP side is the physiological response on your body. So if you ride the Wisconsin course and let's say you average 200 watts and your average speed is, 20 miles an hour. Okay. Good for you. But let's say you do 200 watts average power and your surges are so great that they're 225, 230 for normalized power. You're thinking, I'm putting down more power. I'm going to get faster. Well, guess what? Your speed, 20 miles an hour. But the stress and the lactic buildup and the physiological amount of accumulation in your body and stress and fatigue it's 225 watts, 230 watts. You don't get any extra speed. And where you'll pay the piper on that, it's the last 20 to 30 miles of this bike and then on the run. So you have to practice being smooth. In order to do that, you've got to have, like we talked about before, you've got to be, and we're using Louisville as an example, but that's the course in my memory that most closely resembles this course. Punchy, relentless, one after another. So you really have to train your legs to take body blows, right? It's not like a Lake Placid. It's not like a Coeur d'Alene with these long climbs where you can kind of get in a rhythm. It's like, it's almost like Tabata rounds. It's just like 35, 45 seconds, a minute or two here, easy. Do it again here. Do it again here. You have to train your legs to be able to withstand that. Big gear work, right? Grinding it out, absorb the effort, and then also maintaining things up and over, right? So a lot of times in our efforts, we'll do big gear work because we've talked about this before. Most athletes, when they see, a hill, whether it's long or short, about 4 to 5 yards from the top, before they even crest the hill, they stop pedaling. They're like, I made it. And they go from 13 miles an hour down to 6 or 7. They get to the top of the hill, they do try to hammer it again to go down. They totally killed all speed. So we do a lot of maybe big gear work. Let's say it's a 5-minute interval. 4.5 is big gear work, and the last 3 seconds is all out. You don't want that you don't want that to do that on race day. But what you want to do is have your body be able to do switches, right? From maybe a 50 or 60 cadence all the way up to a 95, 100, 105 cadence, and do it seamlessly. If you can't do it seamlessly, then on race day, you're going to have a really, really, really hard time catching up to your gearing, right? Catching up to the cadence, or the effort level is not going to match. The zones are not going to match because you haven't trained your body to do things like that. And it's going to be like a shock and awe, right? That's why so many people, I think, ride this course to get familiar with it and gain 5-10 minutes just from familiarity. Is not just from the course and the turns, but also they're training in a way which is teaching their body how to react, how to respond, how to attack, right? And the more you do that, the more your body is able to do it. And that just means, again, riding a ton. So if you're in the last 3 to 4 or 5 weeks, you feel like things are close, but you're kind of worried about it, do something that we've done a lot in the past and still do with a lot of athletes is double ride, baby. Saturday ride, Sunday ride, and then move your long run to a different day of the week. Maybe Wednesday is a great day. But utilize those weekends to get riding in, because no matter how great your run fitness is, no matter how, long your run is, 20 miles, 22 miles, if you don't run well on race day, don't blame it on the run. Don't blame it on the lack of track sessions. Blame it on the lack of either bike fitness and or your ability to execute and not be so surgy on a very rolling, punchy, tricky course.
Yeah. And obviously I've ridden the course a lot of times, and it's still one of these things where the punchiness of it is, and it amazes me when you go out there and you ride and you turn a corner and you look at the next hill and you're like, holy shit, there's another. But then when you get to it, it's not quite all that. So I think it's really important to be kind of light on your feet out there and know that there's not many hills, at least for me. I'm sure Starkey and some of these other guys, and they can, power up in their big gear, but most of them, you really have to be ready to get in the right gear. I think to me, it's like what you're saying about power. I mean, I don't ride with power, but I calibrate my internal power meter all the time. And for me, it's just better to be safer than sorry out there, because that if you get, you're 50 yards from the top and you're in your big ring, yeah, you can get there. But like you're saying, those surges, they'll just eat you alive. You just got to be ready in the right gear. That's handling. I'm always telling my athletes to kind of trap yourself in the wrong gear and kind of work through it and just get used to stuff like that so you don't panic and throw your chain and do some weird stuff like that. But yeah, it's a course that just keeps coming at you. And you mentioned it, the last 20 miles or whatever. And I just want to reiterate that because after we rode the other day, we drove back on the stick, and when you and I did it, it was a different stick, and now they've changed it. A lot of people think that there's 2 extra miles on that course. I didn't notice that, but the new stick kind of it's no joke, man. It might be an extra 1,000 feet or something like that when you're coming back into Verona and you're celebrating because you made both loops and the people are cheering you on along that school and you're riding through town feeling like you just won the race. You better get your head wrapped around what's coming, because that last 15 miles can really crush you if you're not in that mindset. I'm telling you, once you get down that you get up the third big hill or whatever, and then you're cruising back into Verona, and if you think that race is over, you're mistaken, because it gets that to me last year. That's the one I really, really, I was angry on that. Of course, it was raining. It was a bad day, but
a lot of people were angry.
I mean, screaming bloody murder to myself out there, cursing the race director, doing like this course, my favorite course, and I just wanted to, I don't know what I wanted to do, but but anyway, hopefully it's not the weather we had to deal with last year, and it usually isn't. But all I'm saying is that surge thing doesn't end once you get into Verona. You got to keep an eye on what's going down for the last 15 miles, because to me, that's the make or breaker. We've said that all along, even with the old stick, because it can get a little gnarly a couple times, especially if your mind isn't still in the game right there. So just, the whole concept of riding steady and not over surging is beautiful. And I just think that mentally, for me, that's the hardest part, because you can kind of, like, if you drift, you could be going down a hill and just kind of coasting. The next thing you know, you're caught right in the middle of something. That's the stuff, like, that's the part of riding a lot, I think, that can help you stay focused on what's going on, because, it's so 112 miles. It's easy to let your mind wander and stuff like that. The next thing you know, like you said, you're in a traffic jam. There's people around you and you're trying to climb in the big gear, and those kind of things will just add up and they layer on top of each other. And it's just better to be in a safe spot than sorry. And also, get up those hills with good speed. And I think you're saying, like, if you coast down, that's one thing. I think there's a lot of opportunity actually to coast out there, but you have to be able to step on it a little bit once you're at a certain place on the downhill and get back into the next one.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you said it was, you have to, there's obviously some places where you don't need to pedal because you're going fast enough, but what you want to be able to do is be able to know when that spot is where you need to start pedaling to maintain speed so it carries you up the next roller and not just coast the bottom and start over again. And, I love that you touched on the part of the stick, right? Going out of town and coming back in town. There's a lot of people will lose 5, 6, 7 minutes in the last 10 or 12 miles. And the reason, one of the things I love about this course so much is it is strength on speed. And that is something, and what I mean by that is the swim is strength, the bike is strength. And if you've done those and you've gotten strong enough, then you can run fast, fast enough, the marathon, or you're going to run slow. And when I say strength of this course, I don't mean from the waist down. What I also mean is from the waist up. Right. So, and we've talked about this a lot, kind of going back to the swim and also the bike, is a lot of people, they begin to fade and not have the ability to ride an aero on this course because they're not strong enough in their upper body. They are super fatigued and tired from the swim. So they are in aero less time on the bike. But then on this course, especially because you're sitting up, a lot of people over grip and try to almost over handle their bike, and their biceps or forearms or hands get sore. They get tired from handling their bike, from going down the hill, right? They're not used to the downhill. So they grip their bike so hard. It takes effort. You're burning calories, you're burning energy, right? Same thing goes for some part of the roads. Some part of the roads aren't, the greatest, and that's fine. But if you're not used to that and even trained to have, you're training on your trainer 24/7, you got another thing coming. It's gonna beat you up a little bit. It's like, it's like being a boxer and not training your core. You might have a huge right hand. You might have a ton of power and a ton of a great jab or a great uppercut, whatever it is, and great speed. But if you can't protect the body, then none of it matters, because you're not gonna be able to hold your hands up to protect yourself. And that is this course. And you see that again, the last 10, 12, 15 miles, look at the course profile. You maybe didn't swim train enough. You haven't biked well enough to be able to do big gear work. And then the last 10 or 15 minutes of these rides or do rides in fatigued arm state, which is something that we do a lot, is your arms are super tired from long swims or from maybe even running before. And then you got to get down an arrow to hold that position, because you can maintain and keep or even gain speed the last 10 to 12, 15 miles outside of the pathway you have to take back to the helix. There's a lot of time to be gained there, or a lot of time to lose. And again, you'll see if you're out there watching, spectating, doing whatever in a car, more oftentimes than not, you're going to see people on their horns on the way back in with aero bars, with deep dish wheels, with $10,000 bikes sitting straight up. Not because they didn't do centuries, not because they didn't, go out and do plenty of long rides, but because they weren't strong enough. And again, that goes right into the run. You come back up the helix, you come out of T2. If you have done the swim and the bike right? You've swam, you trained well enough in the swim, you're long and strong, and then got some speed to finish things off. You put yourself in a great position on the bike. You remembered and told yourself every time you got past on the bike, every time you got past on the run, this is for every course. I'll see you on the run. I'll see you on the run. I'll see you in the run. The biggest, I think, kind of false sense of security this course provides is the first 3 to 4 miles of the run, because all you want to do is run fast. All you want to do. It's got great crowd support. Once you hit State Street, it's a little bit of a downhill kind of it might not feel as much of a downhill as it looks, but you get some speed and you might be thinking you're having a little bit better of a day than you really are. So you've got to remind yourself, not yet. I told people I'd see him, but I don't have to see him at mile 1. I just got to see him at mile 20, or really I just got to see him before the finish line. And if you've done those things, and again, you've come in a transition, again, not lollygagging around, not piddling, not making a cup of tea. You've done these things we've talked about from the training standpoint, from Swim, Bike, and Run. You should be prepared to have a really, really great run on this course.
Yeah, you should. It's true though, man. You come out, that's one of the things, like we tell people to kind of hold back in those first few miles, and this is a really hard course to do that on. I mean, it's the next thing you know, you're like 3 miles in and you're like, shit, I'm way ahead of my pace here. What's going to happen next? And then right about mile 6, 5 to 6, you hit the hilly section, and that can start driving stakes into you, man. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's a whole lot more to say. I mean, the course itself is very well supported. There's a lot of activity out there. It's a fun run if you enjoy that kind of pain, but it's a fair course. It's the same thing. I'd call that, like you always say, it's a fair run course. It's not super easy, but it is fair. I think there's enough hills on it to kind of engage you, and it's not super flat. I mean, it's not overly hilly, but I don't know. I enjoyed running it this weekend.
Yeah, I think it's the perfect mix. I think it's got just enough uphill, just enough downhill, a few rollers to kind of keep you on your toes. But listen, again, and that's why this course is so tricky, right? You look at the run course profile, and as you will with a lot of courses, and you think, that's not that bad, right? That's not that hilly. That's so much flatter than where I live. But if you haven't, right, from the time you get in the water, if you haven't done the things in this, so that's why you have to look at these races as different beasts each day. That's why every race course is so different, right? Things, you can't compare Florida to Wisconsin. You can't compare Chattanooga to Arizona. You can't compare Lake Placid to Ironman, California. Totally different training, right? 112 miles might go by in 4 hours and 40 minutes at Arizona, but if you go to like Lake Placid, it might be 5:30. Right, it's a 50-minute difference, right? And then all the effects that the run courses have, and then going into the bike, how much difficult is it? Or how much more difficult if you go to a course like Chattanooga or California, these downstream easy swims, you're going into the bike a little fresher, right? And so there's so many different ways to attack this. When you look at the course profile, you got to remember that in order to race your best, and this is every race, no matter what it is, no matter what distance it is, it's all about the run. It just is.
Yeah.
So no matter how well you think you've done, you have to remember it always comes down. That also comes down to patience, right? Practicing, running things even and being steady and being strong, right? Because if you've done those things correctly, this is a run course, in my opinion, that is, again, if you've trained well enough where you can make up and pass hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people and get your best time. It just is. I mean, you saw it last year, even with the crappy weather. You saw it the year before. You see it every year out there. People destroy themselves on that bike ride. They're going too fast, right, and not riding even, but being way too surgy, trying to hit a certain mile per hour, and they go out and just absolutely have nothing. And you can see it in the first when they round, the Capitol Square right there, coming around what used to be my bus stop. I'll address that at a later date. And you get to see it in their eyes, ones that are fresh, ready to go, and ones that have already been beaten. I mean, last year was the best example. Obviously, the weather was the huge part of that story, but people look beaten already because they had already gone through hell and back. But before like mile 56, it seemed like, but that is this course. And so if you've done that, practice, a few times, running off the bike after some really, really, really hard rides, not because it makes you a better runner, because brick runs don't make you a better runner, but to get yourself in check. All right, this is what it feels like to be in check. This is what it feels like to go too fast. That way you can calibrate that feeling. Know that feeling. Know the nutrition's worked. Because again, you've got good. That's why I think my favorite part of this course is because it's not downhill is too generous, but it is leg turnover favorable. The first 4 or 5 miles, you've got a little bit more of a slight decline, which to me that's my favorite way to warm up. Is because you're trying to get things loose. You don't want to force the speed, but gravity's giving you a little bit of extra, right? Giving extra help trying to get the leg turnover in. You just have to make sure that you're not running too fast on the decline still, because that's again a quad buster, and that's again another telltale sign that I could always see from the bus stop is people already kind of leaning backwards as they're going down like maybe 2%, negative 2% grade.
Right.
They're on the heels protecting their quads, and I'm like, this is going to be a long day, a real long day, and they're not protecting their quads because if they weren't trained for the first 2 miles of the run, they're protecting their quads because they shredded them on the bike. They weren't able to take those power punches. So listen, like this is ripe for a really, really, really good marathon. And you have time left. You have time left in this last block. You can do this. You just got to make sure you're focusing on exactly what needs to be focused on to get things right and ready for race day.
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing that when I get off the bike, it is important to kind of control those first few miles. And I know I've done a good job on the bike if I can consciously actually do that. Like last year, if let's say I want to target my first few miles at 11-minute pace or whatever, just to kind of get into the flow or something like that. But last year I got off that bike and it was hard to keep 11. So, you know what I mean? It's like there's nothing you can do if that bike hits you too hard. I mean, it was like the whole day I was just trying to get under 11 out there, and it was just almost impossible for me. I mean, last year, of course, it was a little bit of an anomaly, but still, it's like a good, if your mind is clear and you think you can, if you have to hold yourself back, that's probably a good sign. At least you got something in you. But if you're struggling to even get out on the course, that's going to be a problem.
And there's still plenty of time to think about it. What is it, 40 days to race day? Something like that?
I don't know.
I mean, everybody at campus it's, 41 days, 3 hours, and 22 seconds till it goes off. Nobody was counting.
40 days? That's 40 more swims I can get in.
That's 44 swims. And hey, last thing before we hop off, is, and I tell this to athletes all the time, if you have a 70.3 or an Ironman and you feel like you're behind and you feel like you haven't done enough, you maybe bit off more than you can chew, you've been unmotivated, you've been sick, you've been hurt, your job's taken over, whatever it is, whatever reason it is. First things first, swim and bike as much as humanly possible. I'm not saying forget about the run, but if you can get off the bike and feel good, you can have a good day. And for those of you looking to finish, you can finish. All you got to do is get off the bike.
Yep.
In order to do that, you've got to swim well and bike well. So again, like there's this, if you're in that, like, I got to triage and kind of pick things. Sometimes I'll tell others, listen, you've missed a lot of work. Run is last right now. Oh, well, what about the marathon? Well, you got to get there first. It doesn't matter if you're going to drop from an 11:30 to 11:20. If you're going to be walking your bike up the hills or doing 10 miles an hour or fighting for cutoffs, you won't even get a chance to run that 11:30. So, and again, swim a lot, bike a lot, period. Keep a little bit of the run durability, but that's the big thing. So really, really, really focus on that for those of you that maybe feel like you're behind the 8 ball. There's still time. There is still time to get to where you want to go. Because listen, and as a coach, I can tell you this is fact. You never know what will happen once you get off the bike. We've had athletes who had really no business even running the marathon get off and run great or run steady enough and hold form. I mean, you never know what's possible, but you'll never know if you don't get off. So focus on that. We'll have more to come on Wisconsin as we get closer to race day, including a schedule of events. And then I'll probably do a cast just on its own on the removal of my bus stop right there in Capitol Square. That was been my home for the last 4 years.
Bonus cast.
Yeah, it's still, I'm thinking about writing a note to the city, but I'm not sure how much, when they tried to move Wisconsin to June, there was this huge backlash. I wonder if I could kind of get a groundswell of support and have that same kind of backlash. I'm going to show up. It's got, the bus stop back. I mean, it could just be something simple, just like maybe a double wide telephone booth. That's all I need. That's all I need. I don't care if there's been loitering or soliciting or whatever they do around there. Just give me cut me some slack. All right. I love the place. I love the city, but not happy about the removal of the bus stop.
It seems so anti-Madison.
It is, right?
Like, I mean, these people need a place to hang out, like you.
Yeah, it's just anti. Yeah. Anyway, nobody's perfect, and we weren't perfect, but we hope you are. As always, we love you and we appreciate you. Go to our website, c26triathlon.com, and it's our one-stop shop for all things coaching, camps, and community. If you need anything from Mike, he is available, crushingiron@gmail.com. If you need anything from me, c26coach@gmail.com.
Okay, man.
Until next time.
And like you said, if you're feeling behind, realize nobody's more behind than me, and I'm still optimistic.
Nobody's more behind than me.
So you can do it. Just get a little focus. You got some time here.
And he'll be chasing you on race day.
All right, buddy. I'll catch you later, man.
See you, dude.